Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into a source that uh, really gets into some passages from Philippians.
That's right. Looking at faith, community, life's challenges through that lens.
Yeah, and we want to pull out some key insights, some interesting nuggets about, well, what it means to really get God's intention.
And how division can just completely derail things.
Yes. Derail the mission. And there's this really specific take on one very famous Bible verse that I think people will find fascinating.
Definitely. So this source, it jumps right in, arguing that real faith isn't just, checking off boxes. It's not just rules.
No.
It's about grasping the actual purpose God has. It's a fundamental difference.
Exactly. And it starts there in Philippians 3, doesn't it? Contrasting that understanding, that intention with the trap of legalism.
Mm-hmm. And Paul is, well, he's blunt, calls the focus on mere religious rules rubbish, basically, compared to knowing Christ.
That's strong language.
It is. And the source explains how this legalism can happen often from sort of misunderstand why the law was given in the first place.
Okay, so what was the misunderstanding?
Well, the idea is the law was meant to guide people towards a full relationship with God, but it gets reduced.
Reduced to just outward stuff.
Yeah, outward acts, maybe used for control or maybe just to make people feel superficially comfortable,
Like doing religious things just to feel okay, but the heart isn't really in it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the source argues that living by God's will based on that true intention, well, it's harder.
Harder, but that's where the real blessing is found, according to this view.
Right. And Paul's life, Philippians 3.7, it describes him as aimed at the goal, really rooted in not losing sight of God's intention.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Are we focusing on that genuine purpose or just fulfilling the external stuff?
It's a good question for all of us.
So if understanding intention is so vital for, personal faith, how does that translate to community? The source moves into Philippians 4 here.
It does, and it makes a really strong claim that division within the community, the church specifically, is actually the most terrifying enemy within.
More than outside pressures.
That's the argument, because internal conflict, it suggests, makes everything else fail. Prayer, service, evangelism, it all just fizzles out.
People lose focus on the mission because they're too busy fighting each other.
Exactly. And it points to that specific example, Euodia and Syntyche in the Philippian church.
Right.
Very vivid.
Right. And the source guesses their conflict might have just been about different methods, maybe not even the core purpose.
Possibly. But it still created factions, still caused damage.
So the takeaway is pretty clear.
Yeah, the source stresses that ministers, leaders, believers, they should see themselves as a team, comrades on a mission, not rivals.
Because division just blocks the mission God gave them, simple as that.
But then you might ask, if unity is so important, what about all the different kinds of churches out there?
Yeah, how does the source explain that diversity?
Well, it suggests that while the core purpose, from God's word is singular, God made people different personalities, different ways of doing things. And so this diversity allows different churches to minister effectively to different kinds of people, but all aimed at fulfilling that one main purpose.
So different approaches, but the same goal.
Right. And conflict happens, the source says, when people insist, no, every church has to be exactly like ours.
Interesting. Different paths, same destination idea. Now, the source also takes this idea of God's intention and applies it to family structure.
It does. It presents a specific view, stating that it sees something like same-sex adoption as a complete misunderstanding or distortion of what it considers God's creative intention for family.
Okay, and just to be clear, that's the source's perspective we're relaying, framed within its argument about original intention.
Yes, exactly. It frames it as, in its view, an example of distortion of God's original design.
Right. Now let's get to that verse. Philippians 4.1t. This is where the source gets, really specific and potentially challenging.
I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Everyone knows it.
Everyone. But the source argues it's profoundly misunderstood, often misquoted even.
It states very clearly, this source does, that it's not mean you can achieve any personal goal you want just by believing or praying hard enough.
Or that God's going to magically make your circumstances easy or convenient.
No, that's not the point, according to this interpretation.
So, if it's not a blank check for success or comfort, what is it saying? What's the source's take?
The source presents it as Paul's confession, his determination.
Determination to do what?
To live according to God's calling, according to the values in his word, within whatever situation he finds himself, even when life is hard, lacking, unfulfilled.
Ah, okay. So the strength isn't necessarily to change the situation.
Not primarily. It's strength to remain faithful within the situation. It comes from knowing who is with him, God, and knowing his mission.
So it's like this deep resolve, born of faith, that lets you live without fear even when things are tough, like David in the Psalms, maybe.
That's the connection the source makes, yes. Strength to live faithfully in the circumstance because you know who is with you and what you're called to do.
Wow, okay, that really reframes it. It's not about power to achieve personal dreams, but power to endure and live obediently for God, no matter what.
Exactly. Rooted in the calling and God's presence, not external conditions.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for you, listening? How does focusing on God's intention rather than just rules or maybe popular misinterpretations?
How does that reshape your approach to faith? Or how you handle disagreements in your community, maybe?
Yeah, or how you interpret difficult scriptures or just tough times in your own life.
It definitely pushes us to look deeper, doesn't it? Beyond the surface, seeking the real purpose.
And relying on God's presence to live that out, not just trying to control things or feel comfortable.
This has given us a lot to chew on, from those subtle traps of legalism.
To that internal strength Paul talks about, that power for determination in tough spots.
Yeah, and it leaves us with a big question, really. How does focusing on that core purpose, that intention, whether it's in your faith, your work, your relationships,
How does that help us navigate all the differences, all the challenges, without just falling into division or getting sidetracked?
definitely something to mull over as you go about your day.